Welcome to the Health Fix podcast, where health junkies get their weekly fix of tips, tools, and techniques to have limitless energy, sharp minds, and fit physiques for life. Hey health junkies, on this episode of the Health Fix podcast, I'm interviewing Kymber Maulden. She's a nutrition consultant and a women's health coach, and she takes a somatic and trauma-informed approach to women's health. We have a fabulous conversation in this podcast because we're talking about trends in women's health. We're talking about getting the most out of your optimizing your health, but also the intersection between chronic trauma, high ACE scores, so adverse childhood event scores, and chronic illness, and why it is so crucial to understand your body, be very curious about your body to get the best results you possibly can. We go through a lot of different topics, but towards the end, gotta stay tuned. We talk about somatic therapy. We talk about functional and applied neurology, and a couple of tips Kymber gives are really cool. So let's introduce you to Kymber Maulden. Hey health junkies, I have Kymber Maulden on, and we are going to be talking about something that is so, oh my gosh, hot topic in my world, and just something that I really think we need more advocates around, and it's women's health. But not only that, it's self-regulation, it's metabolic safety, and it's really thinking about ourselves as a whole and not necessarily giving our power up to other folks who are gurus and say they have this particular program or this magic lotion or potion that is going to solve all of your issues, because health comes from within. So Kymber, welcome to the Health Fix podcast.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
We are going to be talking about health and women's health and why it's so important that we keep in mind that women are not men. We're not small men. We are definitely a creature in and of ourselves. So, Kymber, you have been down a journey with the health field, and it sounds like you saw some naturopaths like me. Sounds like you got, some insights in your health. Not uncommon to go to the naturopaths like myself and get some supplements, and then not really have this reason for okay, we maybe did this testing, we did these supplements, and then here we are. And still you're with your symptoms, and you're kind of, it's a trajectory that I myself became really upset with, how I was practicing. And it's no disrespect to any naturopath. It is a journey, but I do find that this is common with functional medicine, all the different alternative healthcare providers. Sometimes we end up getting all these supplements and things and not knowing why, and not knowing where's this taking us, and not feeling better. So give us a little background in terms of your health journey. What was going on in your 20s that led you to change, your thought process on women's health?
Yeah. So my health journey goes back, much earlier than my 20s, obviously. But my 20s was when I started to really take it seriously. And I left college my first time, to study holistic health. And I went more of the pretty extreme vegan raw food route. And that didn't work for me. I lost my period. I lost a lot of weight. My health started to deteriorate. It became more and more clear how much my hormones and my whole system relies on a lot of foods that I wasn't eating. And I also was during my 20s, I worked with 4 different naturopaths. I would kind of jump around. When one wouldn't really make sense, I would find a new one. And I could never really stick to anything for too long. And one of the reasons was because I didn't really understand what I was doing. I genuinely didn't know why I was taking the supplements I was taking. I didn't understand even kind of just I had an idea of nutrition from my studies, but it was kind of superficial. So I didn't understand energy metabolism. I didn't know how to eat to keep myself stable so that even if the supplements were helping me, they would be more effective. And so it took me quite a bit of time. I would say into my late 20s and into my early 30s when I started to realize, oh, wait. And by then I already had a science degree and I had studied nutrition myself. So I was starting to apply it to myself and seeing ways that it was and wasn't working, things that were and weren't working. And I realized, oh, wait, you do actually need to look at women's health specifically, because women respond to stress differently, because women's hormones are more sensitive. So a lot of the things that were relying on for information is coming from research that, is studying men's bodies and just applying that to women's bodies, and it's not working. And so I started to see that was the case with me, and then more and more looking at the women in my life and seeing that was very similar with them as well. They would struggle with their health. They would, not get answers from Western medicine. So go to a functional doctor, go to a naturopathic doctor. They would get more efficient testing. So they would get more like clear answers around things than the Western tests they're getting done. But like, they weren't really getting any clear and simple practical ways to address their health themselves that made sense to them, and also like added like a deeper meaning to their process. So, so they were more deeply connected to the healing process itself. They were just being given supplements similar to how doctors prescribe medications. Yeah. And this is now, as a practitioner, having worked with women full time for a few years now, I've seen this over and over and over again. Women come to me and they're like, they've dropped thousands of dollars out of pocket on medical expenses and supplements, and have been on, multiple cleanses or different diets, and still struggling with like a lot of dysregulation, a lot of metabolic disruptions, and not really having that like deeper piece of understanding what they're doing.
Yeah. No, it's a common thing, like you were saying with the folks you've seen. And I mean, I will, folks who are listening that maybe naturopaths, maybe see a naturopath, maybe see a functional medicine doctor. I'm not here to bash on anyone. I'm just here to kind of lay it out with something that I myself did this for probably my first couple of years of practice. And in some cases, when I get overloaded and not sure what direction to go, it'll happen too, especially when you've got a patient sitting in front of you who is like, oh my God, I don't know what to do. They're really upset. And you're like, I want to offer something, right? And unfortunately, that comes from our training. When you go back to it, at Best Years, where I went to, we actually weren't given much in terms of deep thought process into working on the social, emotional, aspects of things. Also, when I started at Best Year, social media wasn't what it is now. And I'm 17 years and almost 18 years into practice. So it's been a while, but it also wasn't as much of a factor as it was back then. But we weren't talking about emotions connected to how we seek out food, emotions connected to how we do certain things. So something you bring up in your course that I found was really fascinating is you were kind of talking about medical trauma related to kind of your experience as well. What other things have you noticed with women who are left confused, having spent so much money? What kind of things do you notice in terms of their health? Does it seem to get worse? Does it seem to stay status quo? What kind of patterns have you seen happen?
Yeah. There's definitely the medical trauma is one that I think is often there. So there's, different kinds of trauma. There's acute trauma, complex trauma, systemic trauma, chronic trauma. I think the chronic one is one that a lot of women deal with, because we don't have a culture that has, we often paint health in black and white. So you're either sick or you're healthy. If you don't feel well, what do you have? If you have symptoms, like we would pathologize a lot.
Right.
And there's a place for, naming patterns and putting things into categories, and it can be a source of empowerment. But when we pathologize too much, we end up you can actually have a trauma response to that alone. And so, it can really limit how we see ourselves and what's possible for ourselves. And so I see that a lot. I see a lot of women who have like very limited beliefs about their how they function, what's possible for them, what they need to do in order to heal. And then, oftentimes fairly disconnected from their actual felt sense, which is, this term that we use in somatics a lot. It's like what's happening inside your body. What is the sensory experience that you're having in your body? What's happening in your nervous system? And I think it can be really easy for us to get attached to like lab numbers and specific mechanisms, like my cholesterol, my my iron levels, inflammatory markers, and then we forget about how we actually feel.
Yeah.
And so I see that a lot. It's like a lot of women who have a lot of labs and they're very concerned about their lab numbers. But when I'm spending time with them and talking with them, it's like all of the energy is up in their head and it's not safe to actually just feel every day.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I mean, unfortunately, the model of medicine that we've all grown up with is a way to disconnect, give the power, over to the numbers, or give the power to the doc, or give, that it's something broken inside of me. It's not my emotions. And it's one of the things that it kills me, but it also is something, and we'll see what you think about this, that I hear often within discussions about men versus women is, and I think this is something that we as women kind of get maybe shamed for, like, oh, you're so emotional. Oh, your emotions. Oh my goodness. And it's like, actually, these are the things that we've been taught to stuff down. And these are the things that are actually our alert system. So tell us a little more about what you've learned with your somatic training and things of that nature. Tell us a little more.
Yeah. Somatic suppression, repression, disconnect is such a prevalent issue, and it really does affect every aspect of your health. So in my applied neurology program, we talk a lot about the neurology of emotions and like where they show up in different brain regions and why they're there. And they're really important signalers, right? Like they send us signals that there's a threat going on, something needs to be addressed. We have an unmet need. And so they are really important it's really important that we listen to them, and also that we have healthy outlets for expressing them. And I think that those are two problems we often have in this culture, is we don't often feel them, in the time that they arise, they should be felt. And then we don't have the right outlets for expressing them, for expelling them, for releasing that energy from our bodies. So what happens is they end up getting, there's like a stoppage that goes on. So they end up getting repressed, suppressed, and then they come out in our behaviors, or they show up in symptoms. And in applied neurology, we talk about, it's a very neutral approach, but we talk about how we all operate in loops, right? Like the human operates in loops where we take in inputs so like sensory inputs and cognitive inputs, and then the brain interprets those, and then it gives us outputs. So difficult emotions can be seen as protective outputs. It's like the way that the brain is trying to respond to a threat. So the bare emotion, like just an emotion that comes up, if we're freely allowed to feel it, it's not a threat, it's just information, right? But because so many of us were raised in environments where those emotions were not safe, we immediately interpret the emotion as a threat. And then it gets distorted. We end up storing it somewhere, it gets distorted. We end up behaving in a way that, reflects a lack of resiliency or a lack of resources to feel that emotion. And so I see this a lot. Again, I don't work with men, so I can't really compare what men go through. But I definitely see this a lot in women, like a lot of oppressed emotion, a lot of perceived negative or ugly emotion that gets turned on themselves, like a lot of blaming themselves or feeling shame for their symptoms or for their illnesses, because they have developed some belief along the way that they shouldn't, that there's something wrong with them, that they shouldn't have these feelings, that they don't make any sense, or they don't like serve society, or they don't look good. And so, so I feel like there's, I have heard that like a pure emotion that arises passes within like 30 seconds or something. Maybe you've heard that before. Like most emotions have a really short shelf life. The problem is that most of us we're not embodied enough and safe enough to fully feel them and express them and move on, with our day. And so they do end up disrupting nervous system regulation. So we end up, often living in like a chronic state of dysregulation as a result of repressed emotions. And that affects our stress response, which then of course affects every metabolic function. So we end up absorbing less nutrients. We end up breathing poorly. We end up contracting. a lot more often than we should. And a lot of this is actually just the result of chronic repressed emotions.
I think it's great you kind of went into basically all the things I said. The fascial tissue gets all contracted, the nervous system, doesn't regulate well. Then now we have the, cortisol, the metabolic side of things. I think one of the things that folks really don't understand, and it was the topic actually today of my email that went out to my email list, is that we all just want to plan, and we want to just give we want someone else to tell us what to do and how to fix ourselves. And metabolism being a hot topic, and so many women thinking we can macro count our way to weight loss, and the different research that's out there in terms of keto and things of that nature. I would love for you to speak a little bit about the concept of pro-metabolic versus thinking about just metabolism as a numbers game and things of that nature. Can you tell us a little more?
Yeah. Yeah. So I think that there is a place for numbers. I think there's a place for understanding macro ratios and calorie intake versus energy expenditure in your energy intake. So there's a usefulness to all of that. The problem is that a lot of us have been raised in this perspective of metabolism and health, and where numbers are the only thing that matters. And I don't think my understanding is humans are not really designed to be relating to their health and to food in numbers. We can do it, but for a lot of us, it can actually trigger neurosis, and it's just not a super emotionally healthy way to be relating to our health. So that's one thing. I also think that the understanding of energy metabolism in this culture is either just absent entirely, or it's just very superficial. And so when we think of metabolism, we pretty much think of weight loss, burning fat. But your metabolic rate, your oxidation rate is everything. So it's how quickly is your body using all of your resources? And just understanding that everything in the body, everything that gets created in the body, every function in the body is not for free. Energy doesn't get produced out of thin air. It requires oxygen and glucose. And then all of our neurotransmitters, our neurohormones, enzymes, all of these things require a resource to be produced. So we actually have to be taking in the right resources in order to produce all of these things. And then all of our metabolic processes have to be running well so that we can use all of our chemicals accurately, efficiently. And this is a process that goes well beyond just the numbers. And so you do actually have to your system has to be safe. The threat that gets sent to your brain that tends to disrupt a lot of our both nervous system and metabolic functions, we need to lower that sense of threat in order for the body to prioritize our health and to actually be able to function well, but also repair and heal. And so one thing that I've become a big fan of that, is kind of one of the guiding principles within this pro-metabolic approach is glucose is really, really important. So the idea that we could be, on keto long-term, or so we're relying on conversions, relying on protein conversions, that increases the amount of work the body has to do to get basic energy to the cell, to get fuel to the cell to produce energy. And that increases the sense of threat the brain's going to have to deal with because it's having to work overtime to get that fuel. And so from a neurological perspective, glucose is really, really important because we use up more glucose every time we're trying to make a change in our lives, every time we're trying to repair something. Because the brain's predictive, it runs in loops. And so it makes all of its decisions based on its prediction of what's happened before. So if you want to change absolutely anything, you want to heal something or create a new pattern, resolve some trauma, your brain's going to have to use more energy for that. And if the brain uses more energy for that, it needs more fuel in the form of glucose. And so if we're on all of these crazy diets where we're restricting glucose, you're actually giving your brain more work, and you're potentially increasing that sense of threat the brain lives with every day, that is, disrupting your body's ability to function better and to heal, if that makes sense.
Wholeheartedly, having been in the industry this long, yes. It's one of those things that I find that we're overlooking the healing that needs to start before protocols. And unfortunately, in the industry of, let's say, the health and fitness industry as a whole, it's all about speed up, let's get the protocol, let's get results fast. But unfortunately, I have also found that the stress management side of things, and this is where I want folks to really understand that stress management doesn't mean like, go meditate and be zen for a minute and then move on. It actually means, much like what you were saying, working on your body's fueling, working on how you get your nutrients in. So in terms of brain health, let's talk about this for a second. Do you find that most folks who are in a stress state, coming into having been on keto or just restricting carbs quite a bit, have you found that more brain fog, more fatigue, more overwhelm just keeps piling up?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. And also, like, because a woman's sex hormones is so affected by stress, oftentimes women come to me and they have sex hormone disruptions. And so it's, for them, just helping them figure out kind of the source of their issues, because they'll often be told to do, to work on their sex hormones, which are actually downstream from several other things. So you do need to look first at like your energy intake, your energy utilization, again, that sense of stress that you're living with every day before you can influence your sex hormones. So that's something that I've seen quite a bit, is like almost like a skipping of some more foundational stuff to address the more of the symptom related stuff, which tends to, only get them so far. They'll be on supplements to try to like improve their progesterone or, get their androgens down or whatever it is. And that they've been doing that for a while, and it's not really getting them anywhere, because there's like some very important steps before that are not being addressed first, that tie in with the energy piece, with that sense of stress that they're living with every day.
That's huge. And I think that's really huge for a lot of women to hear that, because, this day and age, like I mentioned, we want quick results, someone tell me just fix it, magic wand kind of stuff, and unfortunately that is not how true sustainable health works. And I've had to, unfortunately, let a few patients go over the years because they just didn't want to, understand that we've got some other things that we got to follow through on with our bodies first. So how long, just to give a ballpark, because I think a lot of folks are like, all right, cool, I can buy into that. How long does it take? Is it gonna be years? Because I'm sure you, as well as I, hear a lot of folks will come in and they'll be like, I just want to feel better like yesterday. So what do you got for me?
Yeah, that's a little bit of a tough one. I totally get that desire to want to like see results, like know that what you're doing, especially if you've been on a path for a while, so you've tried a lot of different things and you feel like, I don't really know who to trust, and I don't really know, like, I'm losing faith. I would say, like, if you're really paying attention to your nutrition, to like macro ratios, to kind of like some basics, so getting enough sleep, moving in a way that's healthy, that's not like under moving or over moving, I would say 3 months, like you could actually start to see quite a bit of improvement in your health in, just a few months. But it's so hard to say because it's so individual, like where you're starting at. Like when someone comes in to work with me, sometimes they've never really gotten their nutrition dialed in. They've been on multiple diets, but they've never really actually gotten their enough energy or enough like protein. Like women drastically undereat protein. So like some of them are just, they've never had enough to actually get baseline functions down. And so their system is like constantly working in survival mode. It's never really able to repair the things it needs to repair. If that's the case, that could take some time, just to get your system back to a place where it's at a baseline. You've been dealing with like hypoglycemia for years, then you need to get your body to a place where it can just like store glucose. And I'll use this example, or like I don't know if it's a metaphor or analogy or something, of like, if you're used to being in debt, right? You're living with this like sense of stress that if something happens, then you have no money to, if you have an emergency, you have no money to back you up. And so you live the way you live energetically, psycho-emotionally is going to be very different than if you have savings, if you have investments, if you have enough. And so what you want to do is you have to like bring yourself back to baseline, pay off your debt, and then start to build savings. And you're going to see a completely different experience in your body with that savings, knowing that if something happens, you can take care of yourself. So the body needs that as well. We have to bring ourselves back to a baseline and then repair what individually we need to repair. And I think like one of the reasons in this last year, and this actually applies to me personally, because, running a business can be very stressful. I learned that a lot of women have nervous system dysregulation and trauma that's actually like making the basic healing stuff harder. So it can take longer for those of us that have a lot of dysregulation in our bodies, maybe have like an ACE score, a higher ACE score. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that.
Yeah. Let's explain though what it is, just so folks understand.
Yeah, it stands for adverse child experience. And so it's one of the larger, more important studies, I would say, that put complex trauma on the map and helped as a society. I mean, not everyone knows about it, but understand the link between adverse child experiences, so childhood trauma, developmental trauma, complex trauma, and your likelihood of having a complex illness or an addiction or disorder or behavioral struggles later in life. Mm-hmm. And so I think it's about 64% or something of people have at least one ACE. And if you have like, I think 4 ACEs or higher, then your chances of having addiction, having a chronic illness, it's a really interesting list of things that you can, statistics that you can look at. But what I've come to realize, especially since, in this last year of studying nervous system regulation and trauma work and stuff, is like, oh, I have an ACE score that's fairly high. And so like, even though I can be really on it with my nutrition and really on it with my self-care, my nervous system is very sensitive. And so there's naturally going to be interpretations of certain inputs as a threat, where someone else might have that same input and their brain would not interpret it as a threat. Mm-hmm. So it's really important, I've found, for women to start to get to know, to map their nervous systems, to look at their health history and their childhood, to assess, like, am I living with a higher level of threat than I realized? Because that's going to affect my body's ability to heal itself. And like, it's gonna need to be factored into my healing time, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because like healing's not linear. So for some people, so you can move forward and still have areas where you fall, or where you trip, where you get tripped up, where you get triggered and kind of like repattern things that you're trying to change. And a lot of that just depends on like your particular blueprint, your nervous system patterns.
Great explanation. Because I think a lot of people, unfortunately, that's their medical model, right? Like since, like World War II-ish time, when we had the penicillin discovery, and we were like, all right, magic pill for everything. And unfortunately, we've kind of been shifting out of the natural thought process of natural healing. And when I say natural healing, guys, I'm not even talking about herbs or supplements. I'm literally talking about the natural process of healing all the crap that's happened to you within your lifespan. So one of the interesting things that you brought up in your course, and something that I've never talked about on the podcast that I really think we should kind of bring out to folks, is why we don't tend to think about our ACEs. We don't tend to think about all the little T's and big T's we've been through in life, because it's not part of the conventional medicine model that we've been wired to think. And you had mentioned something about in the 1900s, the American Medical Association changing their model. And this is something that I find so fascinating and really hard to convince a lot of folks, that prior to the beginning of World War II, conventional doctors were practicing like naturopaths. Will you talk a little bit about what you found in your research and kind of how the medical model shifted, and possibly why we also are where we're at right now, looking for quick fixes and things of that nature?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Man, I haven't looked into that topic in a while. Yeah, I think it's really interesting. Most of us don't have an understanding of where we came from. And I was raised primarily by my father, and he's a journalist and was really big on history. So we spent a lot of time talking about history growing up. And I think having even just like recent history a basic framework or understanding of our medical system and our approach to health can make a big difference for people, because it can help them understand that, like, simply because we're told that this is the way that you approach health, this is how we do it, doesn't mean that it's necessarily working for us and that it's benefiting people in the ways that it should be, or, you know, that it's the most efficient way to go about things. And so in my research, one of the things that came up for me was it's clear that we have a lot of incentives running our medical system that are not just about health. You know, there's a lot of power and financial incentives that drive a lot of the regulations and the ways that people can practice, and like what gets defined as sound medicine. And yeah, and I also think that like a lot of the ways that we practice medicine are geared towards emergency interventions.
Mm-hmm.
And so, which worked for us in a time when most of what we were treating was emergency interventions. But now, since everything is chronic, we're actually just financially bankrupting ourselves. And like, we don't really have the tools to deal with the health crisis that we have on our hands. And so that's an area that I don't have any answer. Like, to me, like the answer is, one thing that I do notice is that there's oftentimes for people, there's a big tension between public health ideas and individual health. Mm-hmm. And that's something that's like conversations I've had as a nutritionist. I work in the world of individual health. Like, I work with individuals, I empower them to look at their own health, to make their own decisions, to think for themselves, to opt out of things that they feel are misaligned or unethical or whatever. But people have these ideas of public health that can be very, very different, right? And so I think we're in a time where we need more people to look at their individual health and take a little bit more responsibility for their individual health, because the system that we're relying on is so ill-equipped to help us in the ways that we need help, and then is also just like incentivized to treat us for things that we don't treat us for things that is not really getting. Sorry, I'm kind of struggling with what I'm saying. I'm like
with getting us where do we need to be, and we're kind of band-aiding. I mean,
yeah, we're band-aiding. And as far as like, again, to go back to the 1900s and the regulations, my understanding is like what was practiced back then, a lot of it was about power. Like, it was about who gets licensed. And if someone goes through this specific training and gets licensed in this very specific way, then they can be practicing medicine, and anyone else, you know, gets put into this specific category where it's basically like, it's not sound medicine. It's not evidence-based medicine unless you're licensed in this particular way. And so that I think that most people just don't understand their perspective on what it means to be like a licensed medical professional, because it's changed so much.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Absolutely. We've had, I mean, such an evolution of things. And unfortunately, there is this us versus them, you know, conventional medicine doctors versus alternative medicine providers, but also health coaches and things that, you know, folks that have different functional medicine certificates, things of that nature, nutritionists, et cetera. And unfortunately, it kills me, because it's like, man, if we all just could work together. So that's my little soapbox there. Now, one of the things that you had brought up that with the ACEs, with just energy in particular, one of the things you brought up in your course that, guys, by the way, it's called Habitually Healthy. We'll get to that here in a second, but it was low energy in and of itself, just the concept of low cellular energy. And when we think of low cellular energy, we think of us making energy in our cells. But I'm also gathering that you were also kind of alluding to energetic vibe too, based on nervous system and things of that nature. And so one of the things I'm curious about is when you're working on helping someone to prepare their nervous system, working on ACEs, things of that nature, what kind of fun things do you have people doing with like their vagus nerve resetting? You know, what kind of somatic things are you doing? What kind of somatic therapy? What kind of general therapy like do you recommend? Just give us a scoop.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there's a lot out there. And the vagus nerve stuff, like I actually have a lot of access to trainings in that. Like that was part of there's a aspect of that in my neurosomatic trainings. And there's so much there. I haven't really jumped down that rabbit hole all that much. It feels a bit like I need to spend a lot more time on that particular thing alone. But with the energy, so with applied neurology, for instance, you are looking at all of the different systems. So like vestibular, ocular, respiratory, proprioceptive, interoceptive, all of the different systems in the body that help that make the nervous system work, that help us every system operate. And so any area of your body where you feel like you're having symptoms, I help my clients kind of look at their larger scale pattern. So like, do you tend to default into flight? Do you tend to default into freeze? Like you can look at those patterns throughout your life. You can look at them, tied in with your earlier years. And then based on that, we'll look at the systems involved in that. So like which systems tend to play the biggest roles in those specific states and how can we intervene? And then we'll do what we call neuro drills, which is like applied neurology to rehab or improve the function of the communication between the brain and that particular system. When you do that, you're lowering that sense of threat in your system. And so you're actually increasing the amount of energy that the body can use for functions that it would be otherwise allocated to protective outputs. I don't know if that makes sense.
That's really cool. That's really cool. Can you give us an example of something you would do for someone in any condition?
Yeah. And also I can use myself as an example because we do all of this work on ourselves before we do it with clients as well. And so we'll see, the most benefit. We have to experience it within ourselves first to really understand how this works. So I have disruptions in my vestibular system. So that's your inner ear. And it's, what gives you that sense of like balance, what helps you. And it also oftentimes connects to ocular. So it's like your visual and your vestibular work together. So I have visual, vestibular, and respiratory deficits. Deficits means, in applied neurology, there's a breakdown in the communication between the brain and some aspect of that system. Since they work, information gets sent from the brain to that part of your body, and then it gets sent back. That's like happening 24/7 all the time, right? The brain's tracking every part of our bodies. Everyone has deficits, even like high-end athletes it's just the human condition to have some kind of deficit. And so what that means is like there's a delay or a complete disruption for that communication from the brain to that part of your body. When that happens, the body has a sense of threat it's living with because there's more energy is required to make a basic communication to the body. So when you're doing these assessments, you always will assess your baseline. So you use something like, range of motion, spine curls. Sometimes we'll use, it's somewhat similar to muscle testing in the sense of you can actually see in real time, like how your body is responding to something. And then once we have like a baseline, then we look at different drills associated with that particular system. So for me, I do bag breathing. I do what's called air hunger. So doing a lot of like long, slow external breaths, deep holds. That's to like slow down the amount of oxygen that we're taking into our system and pair it with more carbon dioxide, which is the carrier molecule that gets the oxygen into the cell. So like going back to the energy piece, we all rely on energy produced within the cell, but a lot of us are dealing with like low grade cellular asphyxiation because we're taking in far too much oxygen, we're over breathing, and we're not taking in carbon dioxide to get that oxygen into the cell. I'm one of those people. I grew up asthmatic. I tend to hold my breath when I'm anxious. So or I'll breathe really fast and really shallow. So training people to use these like simple techniques to increase their breathing, increase their oxygen retention or oxygen intake, can help their system slow down. It like lowers that sense of threat, can give their system a break. So they're actually able to allocate resources to where it needs to go. Other examples of this would be like using, like I do drills with my eyes, so like moving specific, and these are like, again, these are designed to work with your ocular system. Also like vestibular stuff you can do with head motions. I mean, there's a lot of them, and you can once you kind of get to know someone's system, you can actually stack them to kind of help them do things that they're both rehabbing. So increasing areas where there's deficits, where it's kind of a stressor for the brain, with things that are actually like what they call high payoff drills. So doing things that you know you're going to get a positive response on, where you're going to like increase your body's energy. You can do that at the same time with an area with a drill that's more challenging for the system, that, you know, like a rehab drill where you need to actually rehab a certain part of the body that's dealing with a lot of energy loss.
That's cool. That's cool. I mean, I know that the whole functional neurology realm is vast, and there's, I mean, I've seen some really cool things in folks just in some of the drills, the saccades, anti-saccades, and things of that nature. So folks who are listening, that's kind of the eye movement things that Kymber was talking about. Are you with working with people remotely, are you having them do the drills for you, or do they fill out also like a brain regionalization form too for you to kind of help kind of put it all together?
Yeah.
Cool.
I have just started to integrate the applied neurology into my work. And so it's still very new in my work. And right now it's integrated into the nutrition stuff. So it's people come to see me for nutrition coaching, for like, you know, a more somatic approach to nutrition and health coaching. And then once they're in, and I have a very thorough intake form they fill out, I get an idea as to whether they're what we would consider top down or bottom up, which in somatics, maybe you've heard those terms before. Top down, bottom up. No. So in therapy or in somatics, it's a little bit of a different meaning than applied neurology. Top down is like higher corticoid, using cognitive faculties. So that would be most things that we do in this culture, like using talk therapy, even meditation and mindfulness is pretty top down, because you're kind of going through your brain to focus, to, you know, you're using, again, those like higher corticoid functions. Bottom up is nervous system work. So it's using breath work. It's just really going into how you're feeling, the senses, the felt sense. And so somatics is bottom up. A lot of people take a top down approach. I'm starting to do both in my practice. In applied neurology, bottom up and top down have a little bit of a different meaning. It basically means like, how does someone deal with stress? Like, if you're a bottom up person, you're someone who tends to need to move when you're stressed. You're someone that tends to have a harder time with vestibular, ocular, kind of like the functions, the systems of the nervous system that relate to the higher parts of your body. And so movement is a really big part of how you deal with your stress response. And I found that it's really important to know the difference when you're working with someone. Like, how do they respond to stress? Do they shut down? Do they need to be really still? Do they tend to be more like quote unquote lazy, versus as someone like an over exerciser? Does someone need to be proactive when they're dealing with an issue? Because when you can assess that, whether a person has like a top down or a bottom up approach to stress, and you can kind of start to get an idea as to which systems they're overly relying on. And so most people, based on my understanding from my neuro teachers, most people are actually bottom up people. Like, a lot more people are use their bodies when they're stressed. That doesn't necessarily mean they're like fully embodied. They could still be very heady. They could still be like stuck in their head and disembodied, but they're using their body a lot. So you'll see a lot of burnout. You'll see a lot of people that are like pushing their bodies way past capacity, because that's the only thing they know how to do when they're stressed. Mm-hmm. And so knowing that is really important, because you realize that when you do vestibular drills, when you do ocular drills, when you do respiratory drills, you have to include movement in order for them to feel safe. Mm-hmm. Otherwise it overwhelms their system. So this is one thing that I've learned about myself, that it's great. You have this information when you learn it about yourself, and you can start to see it more. I tend to call in clients that have some similar patterns to me, mm-hmm. Not coincidentally, I don't think. And so, but I see that a lot. I see clients that have very clear issues with balance, with vertigo, with headaches, like respiratory issues. So clearly a lot of the systems that I struggle with, but we can't just go straight into working with those systems. We actually have to support their body and feeling safe by including movement in the drills we do. And then also just like understanding that, like, for a lot of those people, meditation may not be safe. Like telling someone that they should sit still with their eyes closed is actually, for a lot of people, is a way for, it's a path towards more dysregulation, or, you know, trying to bypass what the nervous system needs. Because if you're dealing with a chronic flight state and you have a lot of, you know, vestibular ocular issues, keeping your eyes closed and going internal might be completely overwhelming to the system. So you might need to actually keep your eyes open or do some walking so that your body is like, oh, I can still move. You know, I'm just not going to burn myself out when I move.
No, that's huge. I don't think a lot of people realize that. And it's not being taught in the obviously in the conventional medical world, and even in the alternative world. I don't think as many people are talking about it. I know that the applied neurology and functional neurology, you know, realms are just starting to gain traction, which I think is huge, because there are cases, and I'm sure there's people listening right now that they're like, I've been to all these different docs, I've tried all these different protocols, and my body seems to revolt against them. And, you know, for me, for years, when this would happen, I would think, God, I'm like the stupidest doc ever. I can't figure out how to help this person. When in reality, it was just the pattern at which I was taking to help them unwind all the things. It's fascinating. And so with this, I think for a lot of people, this right here is something that would set you apart from other folks who practice, you know, nutritional therapies, certified nutrition, you know, folks as well. And this is why I really wanted you to highlight that, because I do think it's a great blend of looking at nutrition, but also looking at like getting our bodies to feel safe. And a lot of times you probably get this from a lot of folks. They're like, Kymber, I'm not stressed. There's nothing, my life is great. There's nothing there. And this is where I find this to be most fascinating, actually.
Yeah, the stress is an interesting one, right? Because we, you know, since it became like a word that we used, it's used a lot. So it can feel very ubiquitous and kind of vague. And it's also like, we need stress to survive. Like the stress of life is real and it's not all bad, right? So like I've had people be like, isn't cortisol, when they have low cortisol, and I'm like, we need to work on increasing your cortisol in certain times. And they're like, but isn't cortisol bad? And it's like, just being alive takes energy, and there's stress involved in the, you know, you're not, if you're not stressing, you're not growing on like multiple levels. And so, so we do need some stress. I think it's just that, again, most of us don't really understand kind of our basic operating system. And we're living in a world that is sending us constant inputs that we're not really considering our stressors. And so you can think that you're, you know, you can assume you're not stressed, but you don't really, again, unless you approach stress in a different way and you look at it as like more of information processing, you may not realize how stressed you are, right? Like if you live in a city and you're really busy, you might have like, you know, perceived great life. But if you're really busy and you're taking in lots of information and you have too much light coming into your system late at night, and you're, you know, you could actually be more stressed than you realize. Your baseline is just different than someone who lives in the country and, you know, lives a very slow life. So it's like, we have to kind of like look at how our operating system works, and then look at the amount of inputs we're taking in, and then how our body's interpreting those inputs, and also potentially establish a new baseline. Like a lot of us, our baseline is just, it's the stress levels are too high.
Yeah. And it's something that I think, you know, you're definitely hitting on some huge topics that go along with stress, in terms of our baseline's too high. We're getting all those inputs. You know, most people have seen online, you know, the meditation, like escape, do this, do that. But like you said before, we're all different in terms of our unique ways that we can regulate ourselves, and really finding that sweet spot for each person's regulation. And where I'm going with this is really taking the model for healthcare for women in particular, and really individualizing it is what you're doing, and as a whole. And taking out all of the other factors and helping women to turn within and really discover it. So give us a little scoop about what it's like to work with you, how long people typically work with you, your course Habitually Healthy. Give us all the breakdown there.
Okay. So working with me privately, most of the time it's about 3 to 6 months. depending on how much because you can buy a package of sessions, and then how you space them out is up to you. I have clients that I've been working with for over a year. I have a few clients that I've been working with for 2 years. It totally depends on, what your goals are, your resources, especially as I move more into the somatics, the relational, applied neurology stuff, there's a lot more there. So if a woman has the resources and the interests, she can work with me for longer, and she can go deeper. So that's, available for women. And then I don't do the only one-offs I offer, like the only single consults I offer are for hair mineral tissue tests. I find those labs to be some of the most useful labs, especially like looking at the function of the nervous system. And so decided that was like the one thing I'd be willing to offer. I really enjoy getting women interested in minerals. And so helping them understand how their body, their oxidation rate, how their body uses minerals, how it ties in with all the different systems. That's a really fun thing to go into. So that's something I do offer individually. And then my women's health course is just like the idea of it, like the reason that I created it was because, well, first of all, I just love to like learn. Like I feel like I'm constantly reading books and constantly understanding like how different seemingly disconnected areas of life or health actually do tie in with health in some way. And so the best way to do that share that would be to create a course. And it's also like a low energy, low investment, lower financial investment option for women who don't have the resources or the time or the interest to work privately. And so it goes into it's something that I'm also like planning on updating. I created it a few years ago, and that was before I had gone through my somatic trainings. And so now I feel like I could definitely place more emphasis on the nervous system within the course. So that's something that if a woman signs up for it, she does have lifetime access to it, and she will get all future iterations of it, all updates. And it's like it's a pretty in-depth course. It's a little bit, I do tend to gear it towards people who have a little bit more of an attention span, because the lessons are like average 15 minutes versus like, 5-10 minutes, which is what I was originally told I should make my lessons at. And so, so it's definitely, something I get excited about, because again, it's like a place to put all of the information that I've learned that ties in with women's health. And I want women to feel empowered to get curious about their health. Like that's maybe one of the most important things, is like we are raised in this culture where we do look outward for information on our health. And there's a time and a place for that. Like, you're a doctor, so you understand like there is a place for expertise. There's a place for looking towards other people who have knowledge that we don't have, since we're not going to, we're not going to understand the world firsthand all the time. But we want to practice coming back to ourselves and like forming a trust and respected relationship with our own bodies, because that is going to be the thing that actually carries us through and defines how our work goes, regardless of who we work with. Right.
Sure. No, it makes sense. I mean, obviously if our leg is broken, turning within is not going to put your leg back together, or, ruptured appendixes and things of that nature, but we can prevent ruptured appendixes and hormone issues and things of that nature if we learn to trust ourselves a little bit more in terms of our health, but also around food, which is a big one for ladies for sure. And so I like how you're thinking. I like what you're putting together there. And I think it's really a great offering to be able to really teach women fundamentally how to take care of themselves in a way that's not biased by any guru, by any, fad. How to take care of yourself on your terms is what I would look at it.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So folks can find you at Kymber, so Kymber Maulden, Maulden.com. And then can they find you on social media anywhere or any other places you hang out?
Yeah, they can find me on Instagram. I tend to hang out there. And I love hearing from women too. Like if they hear my podcast, if they hear, if they read something that I wrote, then I love getting that feedback. I love knowing how my work and my thoughts influence women, and also getting, requests around things that they would like to learn more about, or that like really makes my day. So that's something that I encourage as well.
Awesome. So do
Yeah.
I. The education at heart there. That is what we're here for, and helping to help women navigate life just a little bit better. So, Kymber, thank you so much for coming on the Health Fix podcast. I sincerely appreciate it. And I look forward to hearing from you guys what you think and how, what do you want to learn? How do you guys want to navigate things forward? Share it with me, share it with Kymber. We will make sure to help support you in whatever you're wondering about. So thanks again for coming on.
Hey, Health Junkies, are you feeling just off? Feeling like you're aging a little bit faster than you want to and wondering what in the world is up? Hey, I might have some answers for you and some direction. If you want to chat with me, I am offering complimentary calls right now. You can head over to Dr. spelled out JKrausend.com. Take my quiz, click on the schedule a chat, and let's talk and see if we can get you in the right direction. And if I'm able to help you, I'm going to let you know. Otherwise, I'm going to help you find what you're looking for. Head over to drjkrausend.com and check it out now. Hey, fellow health junkie, thanks for listening to the Health Fix podcast. If you enjoyed tuning in, please help support me to get the word out about the podcast. Subscribe, rate, and review, and just get that word out. Thanks again for listening.